In the 3rd year of my marriage with Ronald, he brought a girl home. Irene, learn from the young girls. Stop being like a block of wood all day, he said. I calmly smashed our wedding photo and handed him the divorce papers I had already prepared. Ronald, let's get divorced. I'll make room for her. His friends predicted that without him, I'd starve on the streets. Ronald thought so too. She'll come crawling back after she's suffered enough and realize how lucky she was to be my wife. But a week, then a month went by, and I didn't come back. Ronald started feeling uneasy and distressed, unable to sleep. One late night, drunk, he knocked on the door of my new place. Irene, you just want money. I'll give you everything. The door opened. A stranger, shirtless and wearing just sleep pants, appeared with fresh scratch marks on his waist and abdomen. Vincent raised an eyebrow with a dissatisfied look. Mr. Ronald, what are you doing at my wife's place at this hour? At the private club Golden Hill, Ronald always rented the most luxurious attic suite. I took off my coat, draped it over my arm, took a deep breath, and walked forward. The intricately carved double doors swung open, and there was Ronald. His silver-gray shirt half unbuttoned, his tie missing. A girl in his arms was feeding him peeled grapes. He pushed her hand away but seemed to enjoy the attention. Irene's here? Irene, come on in. Someone noticed me and quickly stood up to greet me. The girl in Ronald's arms was startled and tried to get off his lap. But Ronald pinned her down. Stay here. She glanced at me fearfully, held in place by him, her face turning pale with fright. Everyone was stunned, not knowing what to say. Ronald, I called out, but he shut his eyes, ignoring me. The atmosphere grew awkward. Someone tried to ease the tension. Hey, come in and sit. Ronald is drunk, he hasn't sobered up yet. No need. I have something to say and then I'll leave. I took a deep breath and stepped forward 2 steps. Ronald opened his eyes, looking at me coldly. Want money again? How much this time? 100,000, 200,000, or 1,000,000? The room fell silent. For a moment, I wanted to turn and leave. But reason held me back. I lowered my head, staring at my toes, my throat thick with emotion. My brother's not doing well. He was just sent to the ICU and needs 300,000. Ronald gave the others a look that said, told you so. His long fingers played with the girl's hair. Irene, since we got married, how many times have I given you 300,000? Have you ever made me happy? I can give you the money, but it's gotta feel good for me. Don't you think? I forced back tears of humiliation, gritting my teeth as I looked up at him. What do you want me to do? Ronald raised an eyebrow and smiled. I see you know how to dress up nicely when asking for money, so you do understand. His dark eyes showed cold cruelty. What makes you any different from them? These girls, at least they're not pretending to be so noble. As tears threatened to fall, I turned and ran out of the room in a panic. Ronald, that's too much, someone said. Yeah, I almost felt sorry for Irene crying like that. So, starting to care, are we? Ronald's voice deepened. Irene's actually quite nice, pretty, quiet, and meticulous. True, I'll give the 300,000 for you. Ronald, what are you doing? Don't cause any deaths. The sound of a smashing bottle and a man's cursing faded behind me. The moment I entered the elevator, I leaned weakly against the wall, and tears streamed down my face. In 3 years of marriage, I knew Ronald fooled around outside. Marrying to fulfill family agreements, he was unwilling from the start. Before the wedding, his girlfriend Cindy died in a diving accident. He believed it was David and I who caused her death, despising me even more. He left immediately after the wedding. 3 months later, he returned with a stranger in Tallinn. The following years, he changed girlfriends frequently. Each bore a slight resemblance to Cindy. But for the first time, he brought a girl named Nina back home. When I returned from the hospital, the household staff looked at me strangely. It wasn't until I went upstairs and entered our bedroom that I saw Ronald lying on the marital bed. Nina, sitting beside him, was obediently feeding him water. When I walked in, the girl nearly jumped up in fright. Mr. Ronald is drunk. I stood at the door and waved at her. Take good care of him. That's not right. You're his wife, you should be doing this. No worries, he likes you. He'll be more comfortable with you taking care of him. I smiled, turned around, and headed out. Irene. Ronald suddenly called out. He was holding Nina, squinting at me. Where are you going? You should learn from the young girl here how to serve your man. You're as stiff as a log, can't even open your mouth when kissing. Before he finished, the sound of a photo frame shattering filled the room. It was our wedding photo, now in pieces on the floor. My face blank, I looked at him. Anything else you want to say? Ronald pushed Nina away and slowly sat up straight. Irene, think carefully about what you're doing. I curled my lips into a smile, pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared, and handed them to him. Sign this, Ronald. We're getting a divorce. I'm giving her your spot. Irene, when you overact, it's hard to wrap things up smoothly. After you sign, just notify me. Without another glance, I walked out of the room and headed downstairs. As I stepped outside, Ronald stood upstairs, looking down at me. Irene, walking out is easy, coming back won't be. I didn't look back or respond. Dragging my suitcase, I stepped into the dark night. It was very cold in early winter in New York. I tightened my coat and bought a small bottle of liquor from a convenience store. I had nearly all my money in the hospital account, and now, after searching everywhere, I only had $300 on me to avoid freezing on the street. I needed to find a small motel first. While looking on my phone for a cheap motel, a man's voice suddenly came from beside me. Mind sharing a table? I didn't look up. Sure. The man sat beside me, and from the corner of my eye, I noticed the fine, expensive fabric of his coat. Surprised, I finally looked up at him. He was shamelessly staring at me. I frowned slightly, but Vincent's gaze grew bolder. Irene, it's midnight, you're dressed so nicely, and you've been drinking. Aren't you afraid someone might have bad intentions? Crime rate's pretty low, don't worry about it. I put away my phone, stood up, and pulled my suitcase, ready to leave. Vincent stood up too. Where are you going so late? I saw the places you're looking at, they're too cheap and unsafe. Let me book a hotel for you. I didn't respond, but dragged my suitcase quickly. Hey, watch out, Yuri, not even looking at traffic. A car sped by, and Vincent grabbed my wrist, pulling me to his side. I yanked my hand away forcefully. What do you want? To help a friend. Help or just trying to sleep with me? I couldn't resist a self-deprecating laugh. Vincent, I know, I rejected you before, and you want revenge. Revenge? Vincent's eyes, always carrying a lazy smile, now showed no trace of it. Is that really what you think of me? What else? Cold wind made my stomach ache, and I couldn't stop myself from retching. My entire body felt twisted in pain. By the end, I was so weak I couldn't stand. Vincent patted my back, wiped my mouth with tissues. His pants and shoes were dirty from me, yet he didn't care. Squatting on the ground, I couldn't help but cry. Why is everyone bullying me? Why is everyone treating me this way? None of you are good people, none of you. Irene. Vincent's gentle voice calmed me. I never bullied you, never meant to. I just got back, heard about what happened to you. I couldn't stop worrying. I followed you tonight, just afraid you'd do something reckless. If you don't want to see me, I'll call a friend. No friends. Since my family's issues, I've had no friends. Vincent stayed silent for a moment, then, want me to call your husband to pick you up? Divorced. I signed the papers, left everything behind. I smiled bitterly, stood up unsteadily. He's right. I spent a lot of his money over the years. It's over, we owe each other nothing. Do you still love him? I paused, then shook my head. No, haven't for a long time. Vincent, I'm not that pitiful. Irene, would you try liking me? I was stunned, looking at Vincent. Don't you hate me? When I rejected him back then, I was young and harsh. Vincent shook his head. Over the years, he wasn't that impulsive young man anymore. Time had made him mature and distinguished, his demeanor even slightly surpassing Ronald's. I thought about hating you but couldn't. Irene, would you try with me? Maybe it was my silence. He smiled again. Even if it's just a vent, you can play with May's eyes carefree, like he was joking, but the light in his eyes warmed me. I suddenly couldn't look directly at him. Let's go to the hotel. You don't look well. You need rest. Vincent took my suitcase, offered his arm. Watch yourself, hold on. After settling me in the hotel, Vincent was about to leave. I had taken a comfortable hot shower, changed into a warm robe. Even my long hair, he patiently dried. At the door, I suddenly called, Vincent. He turned, and I went on tiptoe, hooking my arms around his neck to kiss him. The first time I kissed Ronald, he said I was stiff and boring. He pushed me away and walked off. Now, I've learned to kiss, but it's with someone I never imagined. As I opened my mouth, Vincent took control. His hot hands gripped my waist, pressing me against the door. As his dominant kiss fell, tears slowly spilled from the corners of my eyes. Irene, don't cry. Vincent held me tightly, so I couldn't see the complexity in his eyes. When you cry, I lose all my principles. Even if you're playing with me, Irene, I'll take it. The night was quiet. It was early winter, yet there was still a faint scent of osmanthus in the air. Tiny osmanthus flowers floated into the lake, creating gentle ripples. Wave after wave, as if they wrapped around one's heart. Vincent was utterly shocked by this unexpected surprise he never dared to dream of. His heart felt tightly bound by countless threads, cutting into his flesh. It hurt, but in a good way. He held Irene tightly, very tightly. His face buried in the crook of her neck, his eyes burning, and even his tear ducts felt sore. Irene. He wished he could meld her into his very bones. But in the end, all he could do was ask, with a trembling voice, does it still hurt? Irene was still silently crying. Vincent kissed her tear-soaked brows, saying, I'll go out, just please don't cry, okay? But Irene shook her head and held onto his waist even tighter. At that moment, Vincent couldn't help but think he wouldn't hesitate a second to give her his life. It was still the penthouse suite in Little Golden Mountain. Amidst the lively atmosphere, Ronald suddenly threw down his cards and said, You guys play on, I need some air. Nina quickly stood up to follow him. But Ronald coldly said, Don't follow me. He grabbed a cigarette, stepped onto the balcony, and lit it. He unlocked his phone. No messages from Irene. Not even any activity on the household card he gave her. Ronald realized, in their 3 years of marriage, Irene had only asked him for money 3 times. The first time was a year after her family had its downfall. Her older brother, David, had a severe accident. She emptied her savings but still couldn't gather enough money. The second time was when David couldn't accept his paraplegia and nearly took his own life. The third time was that last time at Little Golden Mountain, the time she left crying. His harsh words then were because that day marked Cindy's death anniversary. His mood was terrible, and he said things without thinking. But he never expected Irene would ask for a divorce. She even had the papers ready, signed them, and was willing to walk away with nothing. Ronald, any news yet? Ronald took a drag, then chuckled, let her be. But don't worry too much. With her family's situation, she won't last long without you. Her older brother is a bottomless pit. Ronald was confident Irene wouldn't dare go through with the divorce. Irene was deeply bonded to David. She wouldn't just leave him behind. Thinking about David, Ronald's anxiety suddenly calmed. He stubbed out his cigarette and nonchalantly said, She'll have a tough time out there. She'll realize how good it is being my wife. Our old man's birthday is in a couple of days. You have to bring your sister-in-law. Consider it a way out for her. Women, you know, just need a little coaxing. His friend sighed, look at Felix. Vicky seems all lovey-dovey with Richard in Hong Kong, and what's Felix become this past year? Ronald's fingers on the railing tightened. Seeing Ronald's resolve waver, his friend took his phone, unlocked it with his face, and dialed Irene's number. Ronald didn't stop him. Deep down, he probably wanted that call to go through. But the line rang, only to be answered by an automated message. The number you are calling is temporarily unavailable. Perfect, Ronald smirked coldly. She had blocked him. His friend was surprised. Maybe it's a signal issue. Let me try again. No need. Ronald took the phone with a cold face and walked back to the room. Just as he reached the door, his phone rang. Ronald, I went to visit David today, but the hospital said he was discharged yesterday. Ronald stopped abruptly. What did you say? David, a paraplegic, who discharged him? Irene's family had long crumbled, scattered in all directions. Irene had no other close relatives except David. But with David in such a condition, stopping treatment could be fatal. Would Irene ignore David's life just to fight with him? Ronald, what happened? David got discharged. Really? In his condition? Ronald's face was expressionless. Whatever, it's none of my business. Irene wants a divorce, right? So why should David matter to me? Maybe you should try to contact Irene. Things shouldn't get that serious. Ronald entered the room, his tone icy. No one is to contact her. Anyone who does is no friend of mine from now on. When I left the hospital, it was late. Seeing me come downstairs, Vincent immediately put out his cigarette. I paused, looking at him standing there in the dense night. Since that night, things between us had gotten complicated. He helped with my brother's situation and fronted the money. Even though I insisted on writing an IOU to end things there. Vincent clearly didn't think so. After my brother's transfer, Vincent introduced me to his close friends. Tired? Vincent walked up to me. The caregivers and therapists we hired are professional and dedicated. You don't have to do everything yourself. I only have one relative. This is the least I can do for him now. Vincent smiled. Leave it to the professionals. Irene, have you ever thought about doing what you love? I paused, contemplating. After all the trouble at home and David's accident, I was always busy like a spinning top and lost my own life. The passions and dreams I once had felt like faded memories. Since your brother moved to Beijing, he seems better. Maybe you can focus on yourself now. What could I do? I looked at Vincent, feeling lost. I feel like I've fallen out of touch with the world these past 3 years. But the things you learned can be picked up quickly. Irene, you could start playing the violin again, and even exhibit your Chinese paintings. Vincent's eyes sparkled with a smile. You could even open a custom Cheongsam design studio. You're the most stunning woman in a Cheongsam I've ever seen. Can I? Something inside me began to stir. Everything Vincent mentioned, I loved. But I hadn't touched a violin or paintbrush in 3 years. After marriage, I thought about working, but Ronald never agreed. He seemed determined to keep me in his grasp, always dependent on him, bowing to his whims. Why can't you? Vincent held my hand and led me forward. At least I'll always have your back. But I already owe you so much money, Vincent. These hobbies turning into businesses, each one is a money pit. Irene, I'm a businessman. It's just business. You have great potential. Investing in you won't be a loss. Let me think about it, okay? Of course. Vincent opened the car door, helped me get in, but now, I want to take you somewhere very important. Where to? To see the sea, to swim, to dive. My eyes widened suddenly, and the color drained from my face. Unconsciously, my fingers started to tremble violently. Ronald liked this girl, Cindy. She came from a modest family, kind and beautiful. After our wedding announcement, she went to the seaside in a bad mood. She had an accident while diving and couldn't be saved. After Cindy died, Ronald's attitude toward me changed drastically. And I, still foolishly believed at the time, that the innocent would remain innocent. I hadn't done anything. A clear conscience is at ease. The truth will come out eventually. But once prejudice takes root in the heart, how can it be easily changed? It took 3 days to find Cindy's body. I was there that day. Ronald left me alone on the coral reef. It wasn't until the tide started rising that a safety officer brought me to the lifeboat. Since then, I've been terrified of anything related to the sea. I won't go, Vincent, I'm afraid of the water. Irene. Vincent helped fasten my seatbelt and looked at me intently. Don't punish yourself for someone else's mistakes. You did nothing wrong, so you don't need to be afraid. You swim well, you love the sea. Why not go? I forced a smile and shook my head. When I was young, I thought since I liked Ronald and we were engaged, we should marry. He chose to marry me instead of Cindy, so I wasn't wrong. But later, the endless agony and pain taught me. Marrying a man who doesn't love you and loves someone else is the biggest mistake. Irene, he didn't have the courage to go against his family and marry the woman he loved. That's his fault, not yours. Vincent gently cupped my face, wiping away the tears from the corners of my eyes. Don't bear the guilt that isn't yours. Always love yourself the most, even more. The sea is so beautiful, it's not at fault, why not go see it? Vincent ultimately took me to the seashore. The vast sky and earth, the boundless sea, emphasized human frailty. He encouraged me to take off my shoes and walk into the shallow water with him. The water was a bit chilly, and my calves began to cramp slightly. But Vincent's hand was warm and strong, a fortress I could rely on. I gradually relaxed, lifting my skirt, and started stepping into the small waves. At some point, Vincent let go of my hand, and I didn't even notice. Until a bigger wave swept in, I lost my balance and almost fell. In panic, I looked back frequently, calling out his name, Vincent. Irene, I'm here. A warm, sturdy hand gripped my fingertips tightly. Then, soaking my skirt, he pulled me into his arms. At that moment, the world was silent, as if a long-lost soul had found redemption. On the third day, Vincent took me diving. I didn't dare to go into deep waters, so I didn't see the deep sea wonders. But to me, it was already a huge step forward. On the last day, we lay on the deck sunbathing. I don't remember who kissed whom first. But it was a long kiss. It was heart-stirring. The seaside villa allowed the sea breeze to blow through. You could also hear the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. Vincent coaxed me into drinking a little red wine. Just tipsy, he settled me on the rim of the balcony. I was still afraid of the sea, still scared of this high place without a firm hold. So I clung tightly around his neck, my legs wrapped around his narrow waist. He laughed softly into my ear. Irene, why are you shaking? I'm scared. The railing is narrow, I'll fall, Vincent. With me here, how would I let you fall? He leaned down, gently kissing my ear. The tingling sensation made my entire back and neck feel like tiny electric currents were crawling. Dizzy and sinking. If you keep this up, I won't talk to you anymore. I tried to push him away, and he mischievously pretended to let go. I screamed in fright, clinging to him tightly. All right, let's go back inside. He chuckled deeply and joyously, easily picking me up. That night was our second time. I was still nervous, having always feared pain since childhood. Irene. Vincent leaned down, intertwining his fingers with mine. He kissed my brow. Close your eyes, relax. I will love you well, Irene. Vincent's handsome face showed pure sincerity. His dark eyes always had a comforting light when looking at me. I didn't respond, just closed my eyes gently as he said. Outside the French windows, waves crashed fiercely onto the rocks, turning into mist. I felt like a little boat drifting on the dark sea, hit by waves, riding the crest of the tide. But this little boat would ultimately sail out of the storm, into a big and warm harbor. When Ronald woke up from the dream again, it was already 4 a.m. This was the villa in Courtyard No. 1, the wedding house he shared with Irene. Irene left just as winter began. And by now, it had snowed for the second time. In his dream earlier, Ronald saw Cindy. Cindy asked him with teary eyes, Ronald, are you about to forget me? Have you already fallen for Irene? He slowly sat up until his emotions settled. He had long known that Cindy's death was an accident and Irene was innocent. Maybe he subconsciously knew he would fall for Irene. So he acted so absurdly, trying to nip it all in the bud. But in the end, things spiraled out of control. Who wouldn't be moved by a woman like Irene? Even his friends around him, even Felix. They all had told him more than once, to forget Cindy and to settle down with Irene. Truth be told, he had thought about settling down with Irene, too. But just when he had that thought, Irene's heart had already covered itself with a layer of ice that wouldn't melt. Even when he came home drunk, she would still take care of him, but subtly avoid his touch. She wouldn't let him kiss her or stay in the same room with him. She would even gently smile and ask him if he should call his girlfriend. Such a forever good-natured woman, in the end, shattered their wedding photo. She signed the divorce papers, agreeing to leave with nothing. Ronald found himself more and more out of control, more and more troubled. He began to zone out even during joyful gatherings with friends. The arrangement of the house and the food started to bother him. Everything was in the same order as it was when Irene was home. The maids and housekeepers were following Irene's previous instructions, but everything just felt off. His shirt and tie combinations were always just so. The humidity and temperature of the room were never as comfortable as when Irene was home. He couldn't even remember what clothes Irene used to prepare for him when it snowed. So much so that he caught the flu twice in a row. When he was burning with fever, there was no more honey water at the perfect temperature at hand. No one stayed up all night to take care of him. The people in the kitchen didn't know he lost his appetite when sick. Someone who usually ate bland foods now craved spicy and sour dishes. Nothing seemed to fit. It made Ronald's sickness drag on for almost a week before he slowly recovered. And the first thing he did after feeling better was to have his personal assistant investigate David's transfer to another hospital. He knew David was the person Irene cared about most. As long as he treated David well, an intelligent woman like Irene should understand he was yielding to her. My rented studio is right below the office building where Vincent Group is situated. The previous tenant ran a design studio too. So with some simple soft decor adjustments, it was quickly ready for use. The studio isn't big, quite modest actually. Vincent wasn't thrilled, but I insisted on renting it. I didn't want to owe him too much financially. Since we came back from the seaside, our relationship seemed to deviate from what I initially had in mind. But because of that, I wanted more to become financially independent. Once the studio opened, I got my first client. It was also the first same-gender friend I made since coming here, Shirley. She was about to get engaged and had all her dresses ready. But she probably wanted to support my business, so Shirley specifically asked me to make a cheongsam for her. She would wear it at her engagement banquet. I took my first job seriously. Sketching, drawing, making prototypes, choosing fabrics, threads, buttons, accessories, I personally handled every step. Working overtime around the clock. Though exhausting, it made me feel fulfilled and happy. Vincent, however, grew increasingly resentful. One night, when he came to pick me up at the apartment at 1 a.m., Vincent couldn't hold back anymore. Irene, do you notice your dark circles lately? Staying up too much, you've got a pimple on your chin. I took a closer look in the mirror. It seemed I did look a bit worn out. Shirley's engagement day is fast approaching. I'm afraid I won't make it in time, so I stayed up late. Once I finish Shirley's cheongsam and hire people for the studio, it won't be this busy. Vincent glanced at me while driving. Do you see any changes in me lately? I looked at him seriously, still handsome, with a high nose bridge and defined contours. From waiting too long, a faint stubble had emerged on his square jaw, exuding the ultimate masculine charm. Staring at him for a while, I felt a bit embarrassed for no reason. You don't seem different, still the same as before. Vincent kept one hand on the steering wheel and grabbed my hand with the other. Irene, can't you see I'm filled with unfulfilled desires and forlorn from being ignored by my woman? As he said this, his tone lowered. The confined space inside the car made the ambiguous emotion spread quickly. I felt my cheeks heat up, tried to pull back my hand, but he grasped it tighter. Will you let me stay the night? My cheeks grew hotter, and I couldn't help but look out the window. A speeding black Bentley passed by, looking vaguely familiar, but the thought quickly faded. Someone as proud and egoistic as Ronald wouldn't come here. Irene? Vincent sounded a bit aggrieved. I thought of how he had been struggling these days. His own work had him swamped. Yet no matter how late his social engagements or overtime ran, he would come to pick me up himself. He was considerate of my exhaustion, afraid his early risings would disturb me. After dropping me off, he'd drive back late at night. I lowered my head, staring at his long, knuckled fingers. Unintentionally, I recalled how this hand mischieved on every part of my body. The heat on my face wouldn't go away. I turned my head again and opened the window a crack. A cool breeze came in, carrying a few snowflakes that fell on my face. I heard my own voice, low yet tender. It's snowing. Maybe you shouldn't go back tonight and just stay at mine. The rented apartment is small. Vincent wasn't satisfied either. I knew he wanted me to stay at his place, but I didn't know what I was holding on to, refusing persistently. He always gave in to me, letting things go my way. Thank you, Miss Irene, for your kind offer. Vincent's laugh was low and pleasant. He kissed my hand deeply. Ronald's car sped through the snowy streets. Beneath the headlights, snow drifted. Glitzy streets still busy with traffic. A different kind of bustle compared to New York. David was now settled in the best private rehabilitation hospital. It was said that Irene just opened her own design studio. He still remembered that Irene played the violin exceptionally well and her painting skills were praised by everyone. He thought that now, without money troubles, she'd choose to live like a carefree young lady. But he never imagined she would rent a shop less than 50 square meters, diligently running her small business. Even more surprising, the apartment she rented wasn't anything special. It seemed that the man helping her didn't really care about her too much either. Thinking of these things, Ronald felt his heart, which had been boiling in a cauldron of hot oil, settle a bit. Yet he didn't know. This brief peace would shatter into pieces in just 20 minutes. The moment I opened the door, I was just taking off my coat when Vincent pinned me against the door. Underneath, I was wearing a scarlet cheongsam. Vincent loves it when I wear cheongsams. Every time I wear one, he goes crazy. Tonight was no different. Irene, he whispered as he kissed me, his breath getting hotter and hotter. His strong hands gripped my waist through the soft fabric of the cheongsam. He wanted me pressed tightly against him. I haven't showered yet. I tried to push him away, but it was futile. We'll shower together after. Vincent. I pounded on him in embarrassment. But all I got in return were a few low chuckles from him. Even worse, as he kissed me, he tore my new cheongsam with one hand. Vincent. I was so mad I bit him. I had just put on that dress, and I loved it. I'll buy you 100 more. How about that? With the cheongsam torn, he didn't stop. Even the slip underneath was reduced to ribbons, mingling provocatively with his shirt and tie on the floor. The doorbell rang repeatedly. Vincent was still insatiable. I was almost entirely exhausted. No idea who it was, but someone kept pressing the bell without getting tired. I pushed him, urging him to see if something was wrong. He gave me a hard kiss, then got up with a cold expression, throwing on some pants as he walked out. Through the peephole, Vincent immediately recognized Ronald. But he pretended not to know him and opened the door. Ronald must have been drinking heavily. Otherwise, he'd still be putting on his high-class airs. When the door opened, Ronald extinguished his cigarette. Irene, if you want money, I'll give it to you. From now on, all my money will be yours. I didn't sign the divorce papers. I won't let you leave with nothing. We won't divorce. We'll make this work. All the words he had rehearsed on the way over. He never managed to say. Instead, what slipped out were the same hurtful words from the past 3 years. But Ronald didn't even have time to regret it because it wasn't Irene who opened the door. It was a man he barely recognized. Seeing Vincent at first left Ronald shocked and stunned. But when he saw Vincent shirtless, wearing only pants, with fresh scratches on his muscular waist and abdomen, his emotions collapsed instantly. Who are you? Why are you here? Where's Irene? Ronald's eyes were bloodshot, glaring fiercely. His gaze briefly left the man and searched behind him, only to be drawn to the clothes tangled on the floor. The scarlet cheongsam, the lacy white slip, transparent stockings, a man's shirt, a black tie, a discarded belt. The belt buckle glinted coldly, stinging his eyes and piercing his heart. He trembled all over, his teeth chattering slightly. Even his pupils seemed unfocused for a moment. In 3 years of marriage, he never touched Irene. He foolishly adhered to a pointless rule, thinking this meant he wasn't betraying Cindy. He couldn't see his own heart. No, maybe he deliberately chose not to see it. And now that he was finally facing it all, it was too late. Vincent glanced at the drunk man in front of him. He wasn't bad-looking, but pale, worn out, and frail. No wonder Irene was still a virtuous maiden after 3 years of marriage. Still, knowing Irene once sincerely loved this man stirred up jealousy within Vincent's heart. He raised an eyebrow, eyes showing unfulfilled anger, and his voice was hoarse. Mr. Ronald, why are you looking for my wife in the middle of the night? Ronald never called Irene so intimately. He always addressed her by her name. The term sparked memories of a time when she lived carefree. Their past, long turned to smoke and ashes, made Ronald feel even worse. The discomfort was not just physical, but seeped into his spirit. He had no energy left to be angry. He stood there, utterly defeated. Years of memories flashed through his mind. The little girl who used to follow him around, calling him Big Brother. The beautiful, gentle young woman she grew into later. Her eyes always full of unhidden love when she looked at him. She always knew she would be his wife. And he always knew he'd marry her. So why did things turn out this way? Reflecting carefully, how much love did he have for Cindy? Mostly, it was just a way to defy his family and elders. He was tired of his predictable life. He was tired of being controlled. But what was Irene's fault? Her only mistake was loving him. If Mr. Ronald has nothing else, please leave. It's late. Vincent didn't want to waste time on such a man. Night was short, and every moment he wanted to spend with Irene. Can I see her? Ronald asked, blocking the doorway. She's exhausted. She probably doesn't have the strength to see you. Vincent, being a man himself, knew exactly how to stab a man right in the heart. Ronald's current pain was just a blip compared to Vincent's years of unfulfilled longing and unseen grief. Ronald's eyes were so red they looked like they could bleed. His knuckles were pressed hard against the doorframe, veins bulging on the back of his hand. In a hoarse, bleeding tone, he said, I didn't sign the divorce papers. She's still my wife, Ronald. Sir, please step aside. He raised his hand to push the door, but Irene's voice softly interrupted. Vincent, why are you taking so long? Is something wrong? He had never heard Irene speak like that before. Her voice was slightly hoarse but tender, carrying a touch of springtime softness. There was an irresistible hint of sweetness in her tone that spoke of intimacy. It was the softest knife in the world, yet laced with deadly poison, and Ronald knew it. He realized he would never recover. He had foolishly fallen into the same trap again. Irene, don't worry, it's nothing, Vincent said as he turned to look at me. In that moment, I saw Ronald standing outside the door. Our eyes met. I didn't know how Ronald felt, but for me, it was just a second of shock. Then, I nodded calmly and asked, are you here to bring the divorce papers? You can just have your lawyer contact me. We have no financial entanglements, the process will be simple. Ronald suddenly gave a bitter smile. I didn't sign them. Irene, I don't want a divorce. I was a little surprised, but only slightly. I could somewhat understand Ronald's feelings. After all, when Vicky and Felix broke up and she left, it was a similar situation. It only takes 21 days to form a habit, but Vicky and Felix had 7 years together. Ronald and I were childhood sweethearts, growing up together for more than 3 sets of 7 years. Felix couldn't accept that Vicky didn't love him anymore and had completely left his life. But time heals all discomforts. Ronald would be no different. He couldn't easily accept that his fallen wife, who had really liked him, suddenly took back all her love and didn't depend on him anymore. It's understandable, but time and younger, prettier girls would help him forget. Maybe a girl like Cindy would make him fall in love again quickly. Men's love isn't that crucial, it's often just a joke. Vincent. I looked away and lightly tugged his arm. I think I might need a lawyer. Vincent smiled confidently. My company's legal team is unbeatable. If they can't handle it, I'll personally find someone. Who? I was curious. The only person I've ever respected in my entire life. He lives abroad, so I haven't had the chance to introduce you yet. I doubt we'll need to bother him. It's just a simple divorce case after all. Did you say you are Vincent? Ronald suddenly asked, his tone darkening. Yes, I am Vincent. Ronald's face twisted into a grim expression. In the next moment, he threw a punch directly at Vincent's face. It was so sudden, and I was still holding Vincent's arm. He couldn't avoid it in time and took the hit, his face immediately showing a bruise. Seeing him get hurt, I felt my blood freeze for a moment. For the first time in my life, I lost my temper. I slapped Ronald hard. My sharp nails scratched his face, but I still glared angrily at him. Get out of my house right now. Irene, you hit me for him? Ronald touched the injury on his face and then looked up at me. You hit me for a scumbag who covets other people's wives? You say she's your wife. Ronald, you married her for 3 years. Did you ever treat her as your wife for even 1 minute? Do you know what you took for granted is something I, Vincent, dared not even dream of? Do you know how much it hurt me to hear about all the grievances and hardships she has faced in these 3 years? This is a matter between Irene and me, it's none of your business. Ronald, Vincent's voice was cold, and blood dripped from his cracked lips. He gave a bitter smile, pain and regret deepening in his eyes. When Irene got lost on the mountain, it was supposed to be me who... Shut up. Ronald's eyes filled with fear. He pushed me aside, trying to stop Vincent. But I stepped forward, blocking him. I looked up at Vincent, my voice steady but trembling. Vincent, finish what you were saying. Every single word, no lies, no deceit. Irene. Vincent shook his head with a pained smile. It's all in the past. There are no regrets in this world. Indeed, there are no regrets. I looked at him as if seeing my younger self years ago. Back then, our club had organized a hiking trip. The mountain was undeveloped, and many places didn't even have paths. I got lost, fell into a valley, and hurt my leg while I was lost and freezing. I fell unconscious. It was Ronald who found me and saved me. Vincent lowered his eyes. His expression was restrained but telling. His tightly clenched fists revealed his turmoil. So, you were the one who found me first, Vincent. He looked up at me abruptly. Irene. I saw the pain and struggle in his eyes, the deep regret that wouldn't fade. I knew how much it hurt him. But it hurt me more. We had hurt people who genuinely liked us in our youthful arrogance. But what's wrong with pure, sincere affection? There's nothing wrong with liking someone quietly, without interfering, right? Even if he found you first, so what? Irene, you're my fiancé, and he covets you and even pursues you. Such a man has bad intentions. I didn't want him near you, so I lied to you. Is that wrong? And you? You have a fiancé but still deceived the innocent and kind Cindy. You made her fall in love with you, then abandoned her. Her death is on you, Ronald. You're the selfish, manipulative one. Cindy's death wasn't an accident, and it wasn't my doing, Irene. It was caused by your arrogance, cowardice, and indecision, Ronald. But I'm not like Cindy. I won't live or die for a man like you, Ronald. Don't ruin what little childhood friendship we have left. Sign the divorce papers. After that, I didn't look at him again. I just held Vincent's hand and softly said, I'll be in the room waiting for you. My hands are really cold, so come back quickly and warm them up. That night, I don't know how Vincent got rid of a drunken Ronald. Anyway, moments after I returned to the bedroom, he followed me in. Irene. Vincent hugged me tightly, pressing my cool hands against his stomach. When I opened the door, I told Ronald that you're my wife. Are you mad? No. Do you want me to be your wife? You found me first back then. Why didn't you tell me? You said you hated me, and seeing me annoyed you, told me to get lost. Was I really that annoying back then? Vincent's voice had a hint of hurt. I couldn't help but remember Vincent from those days. Tall, loved playing ball, tanned and handsome, but with a goofy smile. He didn't fit my ideal back then. Teenage Irene liked refined, gentle boys like Ronald, but people can be deceiving. The one who seemed unreliable back then is now the devoted one. The gentle boy was always indecisive. Actually, you weren't that annoying. Vincent, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Irene. Vincent, can you say what you said when you first asked me out? Vincent seemed uncomfortable, clearing his throat before awkwardly starting. Irene, I really like you. Will you be my girlfriend? His eyes still shone brightly in the dim room. So bright it made me soft-hearted. I smiled at him and lightly kissed him. Yes. When Ronald sent over the signed divorce papers, Shirley's evening dress was also ready. I called her to arrange a pickup time. Shirley arrived as scheduled, but her usually smiling eyes were clouded with sorrow. She lovingly touched the custom-made dress. But as soon as she looked up at me, tears fell. I'm sorry, Irene. I wanted to wear this dress to the party and show everyone how amazing your design is, but now. Through tears, she smiled. I'm not getting engaged anymore. I'm really sorry, Irene. Shirley, what's wrong? I pulled her to sit, handed her a tissue, and asked softly. Shirley, still so young, her cheeks glistening with tears, her smile forced and childish. Raymond and that girl who has been after him for 7 or 8 years. Her smile crumbled and disappeared. Her beautiful eyes became empty. He always said he hated her, found her annoying. Called her ugly and troublesome. Embarrassed her in public. At a reunion, she pretended to be drunk and fell into his arms. He almost hit her. But now, when she heard about his engagement, she threatened to kill herself. He was in a meeting but rushed to her house. He said it was her only wish to be his woman. If not, she'd die. He said he had no choice, that he couldn't just watch her die. He said he'd go through with it like being bitten by a dog, then it would be over, and we'd have our peace. Shirley gripped my hands tightly, tears falling like pearls breaking a string. But Irene, if you really hate someone, would you sleep with them? My heart ached, and I held her tightly. Shirley, cry. It'll help. Irene, I've cried enough. Now that I've told you, I won't cry for him again. Shirley. Irene, you be happy. Vincent really loves you. You're so lucky. She said she wouldn't cry and wiped her tears, then smiled again. My heart hurt for her, wanting to comfort but knowing words wouldn't help. She had to find her own way out. I watched her leave, her fragile yet determined back. Seeing her reminded me of my past, tears falling without control. On our wedding day, Vicky and Richard came for the ceremony. I didn't invite anyone from New York, but some came uninvited. Felix brought many expensive gifts. He didn't say it, but I knew some were from Ronald. Maybe considering Vicky and Richard, Felix left before the wedding ended. The wedding day was chaotic, and Vincent and I couldn't see him out. So we didn't know Ronald was waiting in a Bentley outside. Did you deliver everything? Yes. Did she say anything? Felix shook his head, just thanked me. Ronald gave a bitter smile, took one last look at the blooming flowers. Let's go back. I saw Vicky. She's pregnant now. Richard is really considerate and takes good care of her. Felix smiled again, but this time with relief. I don't feel as bad as I did when I first heard she got married. He patted Ronald on the shoulder. Time smooths everything out. Hang in there, and it'll get better little by little. Ronald didn't say a word. On that snowy night, he saw Vincent come out the door. When he saw the messy pile of clothes on the ground, he understood. For the rest of his life, he would never reconcile with himself. What he had taken from Vincent, he now returned in perfect condition. It was a fitting payback. In the second year of our marriage, my only relative, my brother David, died peacefully in his sleep from heart failure. He had been an outstanding young man, full of promise, but spent his last years bedridden. All his ambitions were left unfulfilled. Maybe, for him, this end was a kind of release. That same year, my studio expanded several times over and started gaining recognition. The following year, I found out I was pregnant. It turned out to be fraternal twins. Vincent was extremely happy, he even cried. There's nothing more fulfilling than seeing your youthful dreams come true. I hugged him tight and whispered in his ear, Vincent, we have a whole lifetime ahead of us. During that time when my life was spiraling downward, it was he who held me up and helped me succeed. All I can give him in return is my undivided love and a lifetime of companionship.